deficit, because it is this backup, it's this moral hazard, it's this lender of last resort attitude about the Fed, that they will be there to take care of the politicians who get reelected, not by defending your liberties, but by assuming, and unfortunately correctly so over the years, assuming that if we just get the goodies back to my district, I'm going to get reelected, you know, until we run out of money. And of course, that is what happened. That is what's happening. But we know what the problem is, and we know what we have to do. It's just a matter of us getting around to doing it. But today it's different than it has been because they can't continue to do this. And the Federal Reserve, I call them the great facilitator. They facilitate the deficit financing. And for what reason do we spend money in Washington? They claim there's not enough bipartisanship in Washington. I claim there's way too much. The rhetoric is slightly different, but there's bipartisanship in expanding education by the federal government, the medical care by the federal government, wars overseas, that's bipartisan. The Federal Reserve System, that's supported financial, you know, bipartisan. Now, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't work, you know, across the aisle and do things to try to solve our problems. But there's two ways you can have bipartisanship. And we've had all the bad stuff on bipartisanship because they got together and the conservatives who might want more military spending, they get what they want, and then they help the others who want more entitlement programs, and they both support each. So that, you know, makes the deficit that much worse. But if we had a government where they were getting ready to get down to business and do something about this, bipartisanship would be okay. If they did the right thing, you know, why wouldn't we say, okay, liberals want spending for something maybe different than the conservative? And if you have to cut $1 trillion, well, the Democrats get to pick, you know, half of it, and the Republicans get to pick the other half, and they should work and start cutting back down. But let me, unfortunately, tell you or warn you that it ain't going to happen. I mean, they're still locked in. It's like an addiction. It's a drug addiction. They're not going to take the pain and suffering of withdrawal. They are dependent on deficit financing. They're dependent on inflation. It's been bred into the system. It's part of this Keynesian tradition. They think they're doing the right thing and the proper thing, and the consequence would be so great, and that's why you have to bail out everybody. You know, we have generally a consensus now that they said that we got into our crisis, and this is conventional economists agree to that. We got into this crisis because the Federal Reserve kept interest rates too low, too long. And a lot of people agree with that, and I agree with that. So what is the solution? Lower the interest rate even lower and keep it real low for a much longer period of time. It's supposed to solve our problem. We have too much spending, too much borrowing, too much taxes, too much regulations, too much printed money. We get into the predictable crisis, the bubble bursts, and they think they can solve the problem by just spending more money and borrowing more money and putting more money. It's impossible. You can't do it. You can't treat a drug addiction by just really loading them, and they usually need more and more drugs. And what happens if the patient doesn't get off the drugs? You know, the patient could die. So what happens in the economy in a country? Well, our system is threatened. I mean, we can very well face something that has never been faced before. I think our crisis is big. I think it's really big. I think we're in the midst of it right now. We've seen the first shoe drop, and that to me was the housing bubble bursting. And now we still have inflationary bubbles. Of course, there's another little mini bubble in the stock market yet again. But the bond market, the prices are so high because the interest rates are so low. And someday, the Fed won't be able to control that. As powerful as they are, the markets are even more powerful. They can fix things for a while. They can fix gold at $35 an ounce. As long as they print money, the market will undermine it. And the market is telling us that there's too many dollars out there. And they're discounting it. They're worried about it. They're buying hard assets. They're buying commodities. They buy gold and silver. And has it really helped? They warned us there would be a depression. And you know, in a way, I agree with them. There would have been a depression. For the people who deserved the depression,
Yeah.
Wall Street. They got the bailout. So they were making the money when the bubble was being blown up. And then they get into trouble, and they have all these assets that have no, they call them illiquid. That means they're worthless. So the Fed, and this is something we need to find out, and I hope when we can, find out how much they paid for these worthless assets. So they take the worthless assets off the books, they put them on to the taxpayer, and then they give free money to the banks, and they say, you know, isn't it wonderful? They get free money, less than 1% or 1%, and then they invest in government bonds, and no risk at all, and they're making billions of dollars again. So who got the depression? The depression came to the people who got trapped by losing their job, and losing their mortgage, and losing their house, lost their house, and now once again, scariness. They say, well, if you don't raise the debt limit, this thing will all come unglued, and it'll be so dangerous, and I will predict that the debt limit will be increased. They will probably throw a few things in and say, okay, we promise to do this, this, and this. But you know, why should we believe them?
That's right.
There's no reason to. In the 1980s, I was disappointed because there was a proposal that there would be tax increases. And of course, I didn't want that, and the conservatives generally didn't want that. But there was a promise made that for every dollar of tax increase, there would be $2 of spending cuts. Guess what? Taxes went up and there were no spending cuts. Spending went up because the military spending kept skyrocketing. So that's generally the way things work in Washington. But what they're telling